Hello, welcome back. Um, we separated the meditation session and the talk separately so that people who didn't get to want to not able to do the meditation can go watch straight away the talk. So that's why we decided to split the Sunday session into two halves. First half is the meditation, and the second half is the talk. So this morning, as I said, we're dedicating this session to honor His Holiness Dalai Lama's 85th birthday as a tribute to His Holiness. So that's why we are. I'm going to give a talk mainly talking in relation to His Holiness Dalai Lama's life and work, which why it is very important to us people who follow Buddhism in general, and particularly Tibetan Buddhism. So. Life and work, which why it is very important. So His Holiness Dalai Lama is the 14th Dalai Lama. Tibet had the institution of Dalai Lama starting sometime in 15th century, but actual Dalai Lama becoming the spiritual and temporal ruler happened only in the middle of 17th century. So it's roughly about 300 over years since the Dalai Lama have come into the lead the Tibetan people as both spiritual and temporary rulers of Tibet. Prior to that, Tibet had a monarchy system. Some early 600 AD, and then around the 10th century, that monarchy system stopped, and then of course Tibet had various other rulers. So we are not going to talk about those. But in anyhow, Tibetan Buddhism has created this belief that they have been led right from the very beginning, the emanation of Buddha of compassion, and so even the first and the second Dalai Lama's name were given posthumously after the third Dalai Lama. So, and then they have a tradition of tracing back what their past lives were and so on. Sometimes they try to link, and so the belief is that all the leaders in Tibetan history have been one or another emanation of Avalokiteshvara, but none more so than the series of life of the 14th Dalai Lamas. So we are not going to talk all about the previous the Dalai Lamas, but the present Dalai Lama was born on the 6th of July 1935 in a remote town, village down in eastern Tibet, place called Taktser. And of course, the previous Dalai Lama, the 13th Dalai Lama, had passed away, and so the tradition has it to search for his reincarnation, and so the search party led and have a number of candidates, by the way, to determine whether how can they actually spot or recognize the true Dalai Lama. So they use various what we call methods of examination through divination, through consulting the Tibetan soothsayers, and particularly the oracle, and some High Lamas may have done other particular forms of divinations and so on. So in the end, there was, after a shortlisting number of candidates, in the end, His Holiness Dalai Lama, a young boy named Lama Choedak in the Amdo village, was finally recognized, and at the age of 4, he was brought back from Eastern Tibet to Lhasa. I think Tibetan government have to, because that His Holiness birthplace was even then was already part of China. We had to pay just so many thousands of dollars to allow the boy to be recognized and given the permission to become the Dalai Lama. So anyway, the His Holiness Dalai Lama was enthroned around age 4. And then he finished his study and training under the very able guidance of his tutors. He finished his Geshe degree, the highest examination for a good scholar studying in either of the 3 great monasteries of Ganden, Drepung, and Sera. So, and His Holiness, who had studied under many scholars, he passed his examination in 1959, only a couple of months before the big uprising took place. And His Holiness finished his training very well, but he was really having to deal with a very difficult situation with the communists who has already invaded Tibet, and then they forced Tibetans to sign a treaty of some sort. The Chinese are never known for honoring any treaty anyway, so the world is now beginning to realize that's the case. So no wonder why no treaties are ever honored. They have the habit of not honoring any of the treaty they sign. Anyway, even the treaty that was forced to sign under duress said that Tibet will be left peaceful and without any kind of a bringing of military or anything, but letting Tibetans have their own life. But Chinese government will come and help to build road and so on and so forth. And His Holiness Dalai Lama, as a young man, with very limited experience, I must say, in politically leading a country, let alone knowing how it works internationally and so on. Nevertheless, he traveled to China in 1954. He spent quite a few months meeting with Mao and so on. He seemed to have been rather inspired by the communist sort of manifesto about working for the masses, equality, and liberating people from whatever old-fashioned way of suppressing the masses or farmers were, and giving everybody an equal opportunity. So his meeting with Mao and others Chinese leaders gave him a lot of exposure to what was completely different from what he's known in old Tibet. And then another important event in his life was in 1956. He and the 10th Panchen Lama both were invited to India in 1956 to attend the 2500th anniversary of Buddha's enlightenment and passing away into nirvana and birth in New Delhi, when the then only recently in an independent country, India, had hosted. So His Holiness Dalai Lama got really great exposure to there, but he was already feeling rather unsure whether he was safe to go back to Tibet or not. But somehow there was no other option but go back, even though it seemed very, very untenable looking at the movement of the many Chinese military moving to Tibet, and all the great destruction of many monasteries in eastern Tibet already has been more really distressing than any help that we were going to get. but His Holiness had no choice but to go back to Tibet, and then within few years it became so easy to figure out that how your land is going to be invaded, and communists was taking more control of things, and then he was invited to some kind of military performance or something in early March, and the Tibetan people took to the street and prevented His Holiness from attending that, and fearing that that was just a technique to actually sort of abduct His Holiness if he actually attended, because they said he should travel with no one, no bodyguard, and nobody should be allowed to go in with, so the Tibetan people did the uprising on the 10th of March 1959, and then 1 week later His Holiness had to escape. So His Holiness Dalai Lama's work in exile, first, of course, was very much like as soon as he arrived in India, he repudiated the so-called 17-point agreement, because China has totally dishonored all of the things. They start destroying everything and didn't give any autonomy, let alone genuine one, for the Tibetans, and so His Holiness and his some ministers in Tibetan government in exile tried to appeal to the United Nations, and the United Nations even adopted 2 or 3 resolutions, but none of them really came in strong enough to do anything. And so politically it has been very, very difficult. But nevertheless, His Holiness then focused on getting the Tibetans to be educated, resettled in India, Nepal, and Bhutan in the early 60s. And so his main really task then was to Tibetans who's arriving in exile have actually place to live together and learn and study, so that they do not become totally displaced culturally, even though they're already displaced politically. But he worked very hard to establish Tibetan settlement and Tibetan schools, orphanages, monasteries, and various other institutions, so that Tibetan sort of refugees, even though is very small in number, not, maybe just under 100,000, but they did very well indeed. So so nowadays there are nearly about a couple hundred monasteries and built in exile, and many education institutions, and so Tibetan exile looks very unlike any other refugee communities. They have their own kind of a government in exile, even though unfortunately not recognized even by Indian government. But nevertheless, countries like India has allowed the Tibetans to resettle and have their own little farming communities and handicrafts, and also allow the Tibetans to have particular study place in Varanasi, started the Tibetan University there. So Indian government has been humanistically very humanitarian assistance was very generous. But politically, I suppose, due to the various pressures and so on, His Holiness had to make various concessions in order to get back on the table, or negotiating table with the Chinese government. Anyway, so from 1979 onwards, there have been many visits and fact-finding missions going back to Tibet and through Chinese government. When the Deng Xiaoping contacted His Holiness, the elder brother, saying that the Tibetan issue can be resolved as long as you don't demand independence or something. But of course, then His Holiness was somewhat persuaded by that. and then he made a lot of compromise to seek genuine autonomy and adopt the middle way policy and not seek independence, even though historically Tibet was and should be independent, but because maybe the world situation does not warrant, and so he was very, very willing to compromise the whole idea and willing to live under one system, one country, but maybe in a different system, rather like any other system that allowed. They're hoping that they might actually give genuine autonomy. So His Holiness politically faced a lot of uphill battle, and Chinese has never been forthcoming. However many fact-finding missions they went, they thought it was more like all about His Holiness Dalai Lama's privilege to go to Tibet or China, but nothing to do with the Tibetan issue. So somewhat became very difficult for His Holiness. In the meantime, His Holiness Dalai Lama has become more recognized internationally, and he was awarded Nobel Peace Prize in 1989. He put a lot of 5-point peace proposal for in Strasbourg and subsequently in the USA, and then he propagated the whole idea of middle way in order to seek genuine autonomy to live under China, but this has not really come into any sort of a respectable fruition for whatsoever. But so I thought that much should be said. But then then His Holiness focuses on sort of vision as a simple Buddhist monk, as a promoter of peace and compassion and nonviolence in the world, and then he mainly became more like a promoter of humanity, and tried to tell everybody that we are living in one world. We should not be separated by any of these religion or culture or anything like that. We should all live in peace. So His Holiness became very much a well-known advocate and leader of world peace. And this became even more better pronounced after he was given the Nobel Peace Prize. A number of over 150 different high awards and recognition by various countries, including the Congressional Gold Medal in USA and so on. So his promotion of harmony between religious traditions and preservation of Tibetan culture and language, and all of these things have taken a great sort of hold on many people who could really see His Holiness Dalai Lama as the most recognizable face of a genuine leader who has actually credential not just for 10-year term or 5-year term like most of the world leaders have. Even many of them don't even last that long. Some of them, as soon as they lose the position, they have completely gone disgrace. But His Holiness Dalai Lama lasts all of his really 85 years, particularly since coming into exile at the age of 25. So when we're talking about age 25, now this is 85. Now 60 years in exile, he has been the amazing, most recognizable face of peace and nonviolence and compassion and harmony between all religious. He wouldn't hesitate to sit down with any religious people from different religious background, go to their temple or synagogues or wherever. He would go and rub shoulders with anyone. He would treat everybody as equal as human beings. And so therefore his not only just his teaching, but his action has actually earned him the most highly respected and revered leader in the world, and almost that his popularity as a world leader for peace and humanity has made him to really acknowledge that even more so than as what is an activist of political leader would have you. So anyway, by many causes and conditions, His Holiness then decided to to allow the Tibetan, I would say, government in exile to have their own president, so that His Holiness can sort of can take a back step as far as political leadership is concerned. And so he's done that starting 2001 and so on. And then particularly in 2011, he then actually totally renounced his role as a political authority of the Tibetan in exile. And by breaking away the whole Ganden what we call Ganden Podang, which is the name of the Tibetan government from the fifth Dalai Lama onwards, he said that let it be the small, just to do with the affairs of the Dalai Lama itself, nothing to do with the Tibetan government. So there was a bit of a split or shift from that, and so in any case, His Holiness very thoughtfully took a back seat and let the Tibetan elected Tibetans members, and particularly the president, have the actual say to rule the Tibetan people. So if you really look at it, His Holiness has empowered Tibetans who can lead among themselves politically, even though it's very difficult as it is in exile, but still he was skillful to watch over the grooming of future leaders. And so the present incumbent Tibetan Prime Minister or President is one of those who were educated in exile and who reached some of the very highest kind of credential as an academic, and therefore now and it's nearly 10 years since his the president Dr. Lobsang Sengye was anointed by His Holiness as the president as a result of the election, of course. So His Holiness Dalai Lama has become much more focused on promoting the humanity, harmony between religious tradition, preservation of Tibetan culture, and particularly reviving of what they call Nalanda Indian Buddhist philosophy. Of course, the Nalanda Indian Buddhist philosophy doesn't really need to be revived, because that's what the Tibetan Buddhism is. But Indians have recently only discovered His Holiness. So this is rather because even though people from different parts of the world flock to Dharamsala and Bodh Gaya and everywhere learning Buddhism, not just from His Holiness Dalai Lama, but various lamas and teachers of teaching in different various traditions around the world. And Indians only recently become recent years, maybe last 10 or not more than 15 years at the most, they really start showing some interest. Maybe there are some individuals, but not in a big way. Now, last 10, 15 years, Indian institutions, schools, all have truly now discovered that His Holiness Dalai Lama, as he truly advocates that he is he was born in Tibet, but bred in India most of his life, eating dal and rice and Indian chapati, which is Holiness. And so, therefore, he's become a great advocate and crystallizer about the Nalanda Buddhist philosophy. He calls them Nalanda Buddhist philosophy. Of course, there's no doubt about that. But Nalanda is only one of the many Indian Buddhist universities. So Nalanda itself didn't, started in its heydays in the 6th, 7th century when people like Xuanzang went to India and studied, and that's in the middle of 7th century. So, but Buddhism was 900 years before that, nearly 1,000 years before that. So all these teachings are not just Nalanda tradition; it's a Buddhist tradition. But His Holiness has recently crystallized the Nalanda tradition. Nalanda itself is named after this Indian university in near Patna. But if you really look at that, when you go to Nalanda today, it's got the Nava Nalanda, or New Nalanda University, which is primarily a very very focused on Theravada style of teaching. They probably, I met one or two academics there. Quite a lot of them are almost even hesitant to accept the historicity of people like Nagarjuna and Dignanga and so on. So it's quite interesting that His Holiness tried very hard to advocate the importance of Nalanda tradition for the Indians. And maybe the new converts of Indians who following Tibetan Buddhism, His Holiness Dalai Lama particularly, get very much inspired by that. But how well actually is incorporated that Nalanda reviving of Nalanda tradition in the actually Nalanda proper as a university is happening is highly is an area that I think has a lot more work to be done. But His Holiness Dalai Lama's work with the actual propagation of the nearly over 300 monasteries in India and subcontinent have completely given new impetus for the revival of Buddhism, not only for the Tibetan community, but all the recruits of the monastics are now coming from those Ladakh, all the way from western parameters of Ladakh down to Arunachal Pradesh, all of that nearly 3,000 kilometers border that India and China shares, and Nepal and China shares, all of that belt is Tibetan people, culturally, linguistically, religiously, they're all Tibetan Buddhists. So all of these Himalayan, I would say, Tibetan Buddhists who live in that region, in the old days, they used to travel to Tibet to study, but now they can't. So they are all studying in the Tibetan monasteries. So from that point of view, revivaling of the Tibetan Buddhist style traditions, whether they are becoming geshes or lopans or kempos or geshe-mas or whatever, they are all getting the Tibetan Buddhist training of that, and quite a huge population of the, I would say, younger generation. The younger generations are actually Indians and Nepalese and Bhutanese, and who are not. So from that point of view, revival of Nalanda Buddhism in that area is very true, because Tibetan themselves have very little population in exile, particularly since the 2008 onwards. Not many Tibetans are able to travel from Tibet to even just to visit, let alone send their kids to study in exile. That is one of the amazing thing that happened as a result of Deng Xiaoping inviting His Holiness Dalai Lama's brother Gyaltsen Tundrup to go to China and have subsequently many fact-finding missions, and that allowed the interaction between Tibetan community in exile and Tibetans in Tibet to travel backwards and forwards. And this allowed thousands of enthusiastic Tibetans, youths, come from Tibet to study. So right now we have many monks who are now studying, and quite a lot of them just graduated last 10 years or so, or 5 years. They were actually those who escaped in the mid 80s, and now they are all graduating. So from that point of view, the Deng Xiaoping's and His Holiness Dalai Lama heeding to his request and sending all the people, and then opening up the dialogue and sending people back has in many ways refueled the Tibetan Buddhist kind of academy and academia and training in India very well. And quite a lot of the graduate has also gone back to Tibet in the early 2000s before they impose restrictions of not allowing to come. Have they become teachers back in Tibet? So the whole revitalization of Nalanda Buddhist philosophy style training in both in Tibet and Himalaya is definitely doesn't have to be a vision of His Holiness. It already has happened as a result of happens. But the actual introduction of this Buddhist, secular Buddhism or whatever kind of dialogue that His Holiness is having with scientists, and then promoting and engaging a number of conferences and seminars with a huge number of Western sort of scientists and academics who are interested in Buddhism, is definitely many times more inspired by His Holiness than they ever would have. Reason being that His Holiness is so skillful, very much like a bodhisattva, that he is actually sharing the platform with quite average scholars who are neurologists or biologists or cardiologists or physicists or whatever. They all get an opportunity to rub shoulders with His Holiness, sit on the same platform and discuss their bit. And His Holiness often sit there as he's really learning, but he's totally skillfully just giving them the opportunity to have the time with him. And so the last 30, 40 years of His Holiness, I would say, consistent effort to not only himself interested in the science, but he actually gave all of those people. Hardly they got much to teach, but His Holiness always almost looks like pretending he's learning something from them. But little he says sometimes often becomes the main thing that inspired the scientists to become more interested in Buddhism. So he has been extraordinarily skillful in terms of being able to work as a great religious leader who is able to open his heart, embrace with the scientists, and being able to work with them, because Buddhism is very much welcoming the investigation and checking and examining reason. So His Holiness Dalai Lama's greatest legacy. There's even a movie called Dalai Lama the Scientist. Of course, some Buddhists might think that's the least thing they want him to become, because quite a lot of even there's among the Tibetan leadership, there are some who say, they really do not know about the work with the scientists concerned, as they have nothing to learn from the scientists. So there are some fanatics who might think that way. But His Holiness himself is quite half scientist and half Buddhist. I don't think that you can really make His Holiness half Buddhist, but his dedication and willingness to work with the scientists, leaders, and community has greatly caused a great opening, and that no religious leader of any major faith are able to do that or have the vision to do that. So His Holiness definitely made a huge breakthrough with that, and as a result of that, Buddhism has a. He even said that if scientists could find any fault in Buddhism, maybe Buddhism needs to be changed. But that's very generous of him to say that. But scientists are not really able to find any fault in loopholes in Buddha's realization, because Buddhism is not anybody's ideas. Buddhism is enlightenment of the Buddha's realization. So there is nobody could put any kind of a fault in that. Of course, some traditions and traditional way of doing things, these are cultural things. So His Holiness himself has been very outspoken in terms of not being a cultural Buddhist, and he has been very amazingly ecumenical leader within the Tibetan tradition, like no other Dalai Lamas ever have been. This means that he is actually, by majority, people they see him as a Gelugpa or something. But His Holiness Dalai Lama and others do not see His Holiness as a Gelugpa. They see His Holiness as Chenrezig. So you don't see the Chenrezig as being head of a lineage or something. Because there was this kind of a perception of the so lineage-fixated Tibetan Buddhists is so fragmented and a cause of division. His Holiness probably saw this very clearly, and then from the late 70s onwards, he was showing great interest in wanting to receive teaching from Tibetan other Tibetan teachers, and although his conservative Gelugpa teachers were often dissuading him, he even complained that he didn't get a chance to practice his religious freedom because he was dissuaded. For instance, he wanted to receive some empowerment or teaching on Jnana, on Nyingma teaching from Kunu Rinpoche, but some of his teacher has dissuaded. The same goes with a number of other things. But His Holiness says that he was able to find a great liberty and freedom once nobody is putting on him that kind of strict contingents. So he made a great attempt, not because he wanted to learn, but he really needed to know that as a leader of all Tibetans, he need to be seen as a master who actually looks after all the lineages, and he did that very well, and that actually has been quite an amazing thing. So His Holiness Dalai Lama has received teaching from other Tibetan Buddhist lineages, particularly Nyingma from His Holiness the late Delgo Khyentse Rinpoche and Tulsi Rinpoche, and then of course Kunu Rinpoche is more like a kind of an ecumenical teacher. I don't think he recognized himself any particular lineage, but if you really look at it from where he came from area-wise, he probably was more like in Drikung Kagyu, but then he went to study with maybe 50 Tibetan Buddhist teachers. So he studied with him. He also took great effort to receive teaching from His Eminence Shogye Trichin Rinpoche as a Sakya lineage master, and received Lamre and all of that. And I'm not really sure about how many Kagyu teachings His Holiness Dalai Lama received, but otherwise Nyingma and Sakya, His Holiness has received so much so that that he's just as equal lineage holder in these teachings. So His Holiness has amazing, given the most unbiased leadership to the extent of causing a little bit sort of internal friction within the Gelugpa lineages. And so one of the probably in the difficulties that His Holiness face most is the breakaway group who of the what we call Dolgyal practitioners, and this is we are talking about the very staunch group of people who thinks that His Holiness's idea that people should think twice whether they should practice the controversial protector or not. So this has caused great friction, and it has most unfortunate thing that has happened. And so that probably is an area that really need that will be an area that really would be good to reconcile with, because His Holiness still will live another 30 years. If that could be reconciled, would be great. Otherwise, there's this really big crack within the Gelugpa tradition about that. Not because there's any new people who will lose, but there still is a great kind of division caused by that, and this can be resolved. So there is a little bit of a big problem there, and that His Holiness Dalai Lama stands and himself stopping the practice and saying that it has really no great benefit, but it's caused division and create political problem. That's really true. Now the question is whether all of those people who left within the same fold of Gelugpa tradition and call themselves New Kadamba group, and they definitely are a huge group, particularly in the West and also in Tibet. So there's a little bit of that area that challenge hasn't been resolved yet. So that is one probably is a big kind of a problem waiting to be resolved one way or another. Whether it can be resolved resolved or not, but probably the Dolgyal group is requesting that there is, because they think that His Holiness put a ban or something. So there's a little bit of miscommunication over that, which is a big kind of a setback. But every setback actually happens because someone is doing a wonderful job on the other hand. So these setbacks shouldn't really distract, and there have been quite a lot of difficulties with that. But His Holiness genuinely promotes humanity and kindness and compassion and forgiveness and contentment and so on. And being that as his central teachings, I don't know what really is the main conflict. It's just more politics about within any big organizations concerned. But that still will be left as one of the difficulties in the life of the 14th Dalai Lama. Whether that will be resolved or not in the future will be quite a different one. But beyond that, no other Dalai Lamas have reached and achieved the great many accomplishment that His Holiness's vision of promoting this amazing education system that he's able to promote now through they call sea learning, and with the collaboration with the American universities and some scholars there and so on. There's a lot of amazing educational tools that are going to influence many young education institutions in many countries. So if you look at the overall the ripple effect of the goodness and tolerance and compassion and peace that His Holiness Dalai Lama has advocated, has almost made as though we Tibetans really don't need to fight for our country. What His Holiness achieved is not comparable to having a nationhood. So quite a lot of the time I am also starting to see it that way. Maybe having a kind of a ownership of a country or thinking maybe good, but maybe we don't. We just go wherever our karma takes place under the banner of His Holiness Dalai Lama's good name, promoting peace and tolerance and humanity. We can just go everywhere, welcome everywhere, and promote peace and let the land of Tibet be used by the hungry neighbor who doesn't seem to have anything enough, because their population is increasing and they always have to go in and invade every little piece of land, neighbors. So maybe the Tibetans are not good at managing such a big land, and maybe it's our collective karma to give it. So His Holiness is kind of a not wanting anything but a genuine autonomy is only his vision can tell. Now, quite a lot of Tibetans are completely persuaded by that, and they are 100% believer in His Holiness Dalai Lama's leadership of the middle way path. But there is a small but very, very persistent group among the Tibetan and its supporters that know we should still fight for independent Tibet. And China has actually suspecting that actually the middle way is just like a cover up. They actually want independence, so they are guilty of that themselves, because they probably know why Tibetans want independence. But actually His Holiness' move or his position is genuine. So it's not a political move. It's genuinely believe in that we need to learn to live under one world, one country, and maybe several different systems if the country in power actually were to honor those properly. So His Holiness totally believes that. They never gave him an opportunity to go back. So now there is only one hope remaining, that he actually can go back to Tibet within this lifetime. If it does, the hope and prayer of all the people, Tibetans in Tibet, will be very, very happy, you know. And if China is quite genuinely keen to really look after the Tibetan as one of the 56 minorities, just to give them the opportunity to see His Holiness back on the Tibetan soil in whatever capacity, even as a pilgrim, would be a wonderful thing, because he is a man of peace. And when China actually wanted to have say to the future of Dalai Lama, even to recognize 15th Dalai Lama, they think that they are the only guy who's got authority. Nobody else has that. Of course, this is now quite a topical thing. Even countries like America is denouncing that kind of statement by communist regime who doesn't believe in any religion, yet they wanted to be the one who chooses and decides who should be the Dalai Lama. So there is that kind of future of the legacy of the 14th Dalai Lama will be very hard to feel the shoes off, even chosen by whoever. So 14th Dalai Lama is probably the most recognizable Dalai Lama in the entire world. Now, where the future of Tibet lies depends on the collective karma and collective karma of the Tibetan people, who are now relatively more educated. But once His Holiness Dalai Lama's mortal appearance no longer exists with us, of course, whether that same belief in the idea of genuine autonomy of Tibet and only middle way, whether that will last or not, is anybody's guess. Even in the Indian establishment today are nowadays, as a result of the recent border clashes with China and India, there's even call for Indians to reverse their political blunder made by Nehru, that Tibet's part of China. So it's actually saying Tibet's part of China is already a blunder anyway. If it's a part of China, you don't have to say it's part of China. So anyone who says that, even Australian leaders or American, if they have ever said Tibet part of China, it's a blunder again. So we need to really repeat that, and they couldn't get away with that. His Holiness has been very, very genuine and generous in thinking of the world peace for the sake of that. But politically and as a Tibetan people, how long does everything changes? So when Tibetans first escaped in 1959, they didn't come to India to seek middle way. They came to seek independence, and now if that's workable and if can be worked, prove it. If not, it has no reason to stay that way. So His Holiness Dalai Lama's legacy about the Tibetan issue will have its own time to be tested in history. Only history will tell. It's very difficult to say. But His Holiness Dalai Lama, as a leader of the world, peace and harmony between religious tradition and the humanity, and so on, is incomparable. We call incomparable means that has no match. Definitely is a matchless accomplishment. So today, being tomorrow, is actually His Holiness' 85th birthday. So that's why I thought it will be useful for some of the audience there who may not know His Holiness Dalai Lama. Some people have heard of Dalai Lama, but they don't know the whole story. And not that I was able to make a full justice in this short session on His Holiness Dalai Lama, but it's very good to. There are a lot of important books about His Holiness or by His Holiness Dalai Lama, and so I strongly urge people to read, because learning the thoughts and works of His Holiness Dalai Lama is very important. And by the way, tomorrow night onwards. If you visit His Holiness Dalai Lama.com, he's giving 3 days teachings starting tomorrow night. So there are lots of teachings that His Holiness is now giving during this period of lockdown, and most of his teachings are always aired on Facebook and on YouTube, both on his website. So I strongly urge everybody to tune in. And often His Holiness teaches directly in English. Sometimes when he teaches in Tibetan, it's also translated. So I strongly urge people to, if you are first time hearing about Dalai Lama, definitely there's so many books by His Holiness, which is not only has His Holiness kind of influence, but put down and edited by many able people. So therefore, his teachings are widely available. His thoughts are very important. If you are wanting to learn about Buddhism, it's usually one of His Holiness Dalai Lama's book, like Art of Happiness or whatever his books are, will greatly inspire you. So I myself am not only as a Tibetan, but I would have never be able to be little bit I can do without His Holiness Dalai Lama. Amazing, able leadership, and I managed to do my 3-year retreat because His Holiness Dalai Lama's amazing private office provide this kind of allowances. Many lamas who ever want to do something, their office always helps, uncountable. So His Holiness is the Father. His Holiness is the Yidam. He's the Buddha. He's the Dharma. He's the Sangha. So therefore, I can't imagine where any Tibetan like me be without His Holiness Dalai Lama. So we like to offer our prayers for fulfillment of His Holiness Dalai Lama's wishes, and may he live long. And even when he do not live so long in this mortal body, may his legacy and activities continue to shine and be remembered. As Buddha said, you should remember the 6 recollections. Remembering the Buddha, remembering Dharma, remember Sangha. Those are the 3 of the 6 recollections. If you remember His Holiness Dalai Lama, you remember those 3 anyway. So recollecting His Holiness Dalai Lama and his qualities is really what represent what we call this 21st century Buddhism. His Holiness Dalai Lama advocates people to practice. So with this, I'd like to conclude here. Thank you very much, everybody, joining us. And I will do a short, long life prayer of His Holiness Dalai Lama, followed by the dedication merit. O Gangre Rawa Grave Jingam de Bendan Dewa Malun Jungwen Jere Zawan Denzen Jaz Shabi Sede Badu Denjura Je Gangre Rawa Grave Jingam de Bendan Dewa Malun Jungwen Jere Zawan Denzen Jaz Shabi Sede Badu Denjura Je Gangre Rawa Grave Jingam de Bendan Dewa Malun Jungwen Jere Zawan Denzen Jaz Zede bad dangerous sonamande damje zebanya damne nye bedana ban yegana je bala druba zebe zalando nawa jo tejo damje renje jendela dage sonamande gando tenen jogen tejo dambe renje jema mebe ne joro je jamba ba jedran jamba Kundu Zambu Deyan Dejan de Da Kunye Jezo Dal Yawan de Da Danjera Dungo Janju Samjo Rinpoche Maye Banaman Jeju Yeba Nyamba Meba Ye Gonen Gondu Mbewa Jo. Thank you, everyone. See you next time. Bye-bye. Have a good day.